Perched on the windowsill, Emily found herself lost in the labyrinth of her thoughts, a space occupied by the impending reality of her school's conclusion. The familiar scene of the schoolyard below stirred a cocktail of nostalgia and apprehension within her. Her brow furrowed in concentration, her gaze unfocused as she wrestled with an uncertain future. Graduation was no longer a distant event on the horizon. It was looming closer each day, a monstrous wave ready to sweep her into the world beyond the protective walls of her school. Yet despite countless hours musing over this inevitable event, her post-graduation path remained shrouded in mystery. Her future was a blank canvas, intimidating in its scope and possibilities, a puzzle for which she had yet to find the pieces. The dream of attending college was elusive for Emily, locked behind the formidable gate of financial constraints. She was living on a tight budget, one that barely left room for the luxuries of daily life, let alone the hefty cost of higher education. Ever since her dad, Ryan, was let go from his truck driving job, he had been drowning his sorrows in a sea of alcohol. Ryan and his laid-off trucker friends often huddled together, finding solace at the bottom of their empty beer bottles, trying to blur the harsh edges of reality. Ryan's employment status had been shaky for over a year. He had managed to pick up odd jobs, sporadic gigs that did little more than fuel his burgeoning alcohol addiction. Emily watched, heart heavy with worry, as her father sank deeper into the self-destructive routine. She couldn't shake off the gnawing feeling of despair as she saw him becoming increasingly comfortable with his damaging lifestyle. Feeling helpless, Emily had few options to intervene. When Ryan was sober, Emily considered discussing his drinking problem, but the fear of backlash during his drunken stupors held her back. Her father's habitual cycle, drinking excessively, followed by empty promises of sobriety, was like a broken record, a maddening loop with no end in sight. When the money ran dry, desperation led Ryan to liquidate household items, stripping their home piece by piece. His lifestyle was not only eroding him, but also the very fabric of their homely sanctuary. Emily's mother, Carol, was grappling with a disability, her circumstances slightly alleviated by the modest sum she received in benefits. To supplement their income, she worked long hours as a janitor, yet her pay was barely enough to make ends meet, especially in the current harsh economy. Carol, like her husband, sought refuge in the numbing embrace of alcohol, a crutch to momentarily escape from the strenuous reality. When Carol surrendered herself to alcohol, Emily found her resentment building, a seething anger that eclipsed even her frustration towards her father. Perhaps it was the disappointment that stung the most, the mother she loved succumbing to the same pitfalls as her father. The sight of her mother intoxicated, her normally caring demeanor replaced with an ugly haze of alcohol, was a bitter pill for Emily to swallow. Despite her frustration, Emily felt a deep-seated sense of pity for her parents. Once upon a time, they were hard-working coal miners, a time when life was significantly better. Those were the days when a sense of security pervaded their household, days of smile and hearty laughter, of contentment born from a life well lived. However, the closure of the coal mine where they worked had brought their world crashing down around them. The mine had not just been their source of income, but it had also been their identity, their sense of purpose. Once the mine was shut down, their lives had spiraled into uncertainty and chaos, eventually leading them to their current dire straits. Emily found herself yearning for the old times, the days when her parents were not just functional, but happy, the days before alcohol took over their lives, before they became shadows of their former selves. She longed for the times when her family was whole, and life was simple and sweet. The once vibrant tapestry of their family life had slowly unraveled into a jumbled mess of threads, the edges fraying under the harsh weight of their circumstances. Unlike many families who were able to adapt and navigate the ebb and flow of life's challenges, Emily's family seemed to be trapped in a raging current of dysfunction, unable to find their footing. Emily struggled to recall the last time she wore clothes that weren't hand-me-downs or the product of a charitable act. Her wardrobe bore the stark reflection of their difficult financial condition, each worn-out seam and faded color a reminder of their hardships. In contrast, her peers at school seemed to live in a different world entirely. They came from families that had successfully navigated the turbulent waters of the shifting economy. Despite experiencing similar hardships, these families had managed to adjust, adapt, and even thrive. They emerged from the ordeal stronger and more resilient, wearing their recovery like a badge of honor. Emily couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy. a longing for a life that seemed just out of reach. "Emily, what's up?" A familiar voice pulled Emily from her thoughts. She looked up to see her classmate, Josh. Josh was a breath of fresh air among their peers, a person who didn't see the world through the lens of social and financial disparities. "Just passing the time until the class meeting starts," Emily responded, offering him a weak smile. Undeterred by her melancholy, Josh slid into the seat next to her. "Well, I had plans to head home, but it seems I've been waylaid. I'll stick around." A soft chuckle escaped Emily. "You're a character, Josh. Aren't you the least bit curious about the graduation party planning? It's a milestone event, once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing, isn't it?" "Truthfully, not much," Josh shrugged. "I'm more focused on receiving that diploma and breaking free from this place. I mean, take a look around. This hardly feels like a school anymore." Emily rolled her eyes playfully, trying to lighten the mood. "Josh, don't you think you're being a bit too dramatic? We're still kids, aren't we? We're not meant to be all serious and gloomy. You sound like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. Just relax. You can be as serious as you want after the graduation party." A gentle smile crossed Josh's face. He had harbored a deep affection for Emily for quite some time. Always searching for ways to show his care and concern, he would strive to make her day a little brighter, a little easier, all while maintaining a casual demeanor to not draw too much attention. He often accidentally bought 2 candy bars, expertly unwrapping one in front of her, making sure she noticed. When she inevitably did, he would feign surprise, insisting he had purchased 2 for later before offering her 1. And despite residing on the opposite side of town, Josh never missed a chance to give Emily a ride home, ensuring she had safe and comfortable transportation. His acts of kindness were subtle yet consistent, his intentions masked by his easygoing attitude. All along, he was quietly helping Emily in the way he could, a silent guardian providing support amidst her turbulent life. Josh was well aware of Emily's fiercely independent spirit and her sharp temper. He treaded carefully around her, his actions finely calibrated to ensure that he didn't accidentally offend or upset her. His offers of help were always casual, spun as coincidences or acts of friendliness rather than charity, a testament to his understanding of Emily's pride and resilience. In his understated manner, Josh did everything he could to make Emily's life a bit easier, while respecting her personal boundaries. His kindness, wrapped in a shroud of friendly gestures, allowed Emily to accept his help without feeling pitied or patronized, an equilibrium that spoke volumes of his understanding and care. "Well, if you're insisting that the graduation party is of such significance, can I count on sharing a dance with you?" Josh asked, a twinkle of hope in his eyes. Emily laughed, her spirits lifting at his light-hearted proposition. "You can count on 2, she replied, matching his playful tone. It was these little moments, the easy banter and shared laughter, that made their friendship so valuable to Emily. Despite the world around them seeming gloomy and uncertain, the simple joy of companionship provided a warm beacon of hope. As the teacher in charge of the organizational details walked in, trailed by a group of enthusiastic students, Emily listened intently to the plans for the grand graduation party. It was beyond anything she had imagined, filling her with unexpected joy and anticipation. Then Mrs. Bennett, their teacher, started assigning responsibilities to the students. Emily eagerly awaited her turn, ready to lend her hands to the preparation efforts. "Mrs. Bennett, may I assist as well?" Emily asked hopefully, her voice carrying a quiet eagerness. Mrs. Bennett gave Emily a condescending smirk, her words dripping with sarcasm. "I'm not even sure what you could do to help, Emily. I was under the impression you weren't attending the party, and you'll need a dress, which I assume you can't afford. Just an observation, of course." The color drained from Emily's face, replaced with a blush of humiliation as her teacher's words hung in the air. She could hear the echo of laughter from her classmates, each chuckle amplifying her embarrassment. In that moment, she felt incredibly small and exposed, her financial struggles put on display for all to see. With her pride stung, Emily stormed out of the classroom, her escape punctuating the uncomfortable silence that followed Mrs. Bennett's words. Josh, always the loyal friend, immediately sprang up to follow her. "Josh, where are you going?" Mrs. Bennett's voice rang out, sharp with authority. "Stay here. We have a special task for you. Don't leave." Josh paused in his tracks, his gaze meeting the teacher's with a resolve that surprised her. "Take your program and go to hell," he retorted before heading towards the door. Mrs. Bennett's eyes widened. Josh, their star student, was integral to the success of the party, and if he decided to skip the event, their plans would fall apart. Josh was not just the top of his class, but his father, Mr. Eric Fair, was also the principal sponsor of the event. He had promised an array of surprise gifts for the teachers, making his participation even more crucial. "Fair, get back to your seat. Now!" Mrs. Bennett's command echoed through the room, but Josh didn't even spare her a glance. With a decisive slam, he left the room, leaving behind an agitated Mrs. Bennett. In her annoyance, Mrs. Bennett took out her frustration on the remaining students. "He's gonna regret this," she muttered under her breath before raising her voice. "And you'll all regret this as well." Her anger was uncontrolled, her words painting a cloud of apprehension in the classroom. The room fell into an uneasy silence, a tense quiet that was soon broken by Chet, one of the students. "So is the party cancelled?" he asked, his question echoing ominously in the room. The entire class began buzzing with worried chatter. Josh, as the son of the event's primary sponsor, held substantial influence over the proceedings. Mrs. Bennett was wary of this fact. She didn't want Josh's displeasure to sway his father's sponsorship decision. If that happened, the grand event that they had planned would be reduced to a simple gathering in the high school gymnasium. Mrs. Bennett was fuming, her anger directed towards Emily. She couldn't help but blame the young girl for disrupting her carefully laid plans. The prospect of the elaborate event falling through was infuriating. In her eyes, Emily, with her economic struggles, had become a potential catalyst for the downfall of their grand graduation party. Josh found Emily by the stream, sitting on the bank, her focus occupied by throwing pebbles into the tranquil waters. Noticing Josh's arrival, she didn't turn around. He walked up silently and sat down beside her. They shared a comfortable silence for a while before Emily finally broke it. "I'm just going to collect my diploma and leave this place," she declared, her tone resolute. "Where will you go? What do you plan to do?" Josh asked, concern etching lines on his usually cheerful face. "I don't know. I'll just get out there. I'll try to find a job and maybe go to a community college. I'm not sure, but one thing's for certain. I can't stay here any longer," Emily explained, her voice betraying a mixture of determination and apprehension. Josh sighed heavily, letting the silence envelop them once again. Picking up a few pebbles, he mirrored Emily's earlier actions, throwing them into the stream. They sat there, eyes fixed on the water's ripple effect, when Josh broke the silence with a surprising question. "Can I come with you?" Emily, taken aback by his question, turned to him. "Why would you want to come with me?" she asked, puzzled. In response, Josh merely looked at her, his face wearing a melancholic expression, leaving his question hanging in the air between them. As evening fell, Emily returned home to find her parents in the kitchen, sharing a bottle of cheap whiskey. They were mid-argument over something trivial, their voices sharp with frustration. On spotting Emily, they abruptly fell silent, their gazes trained on her. "There she is! We're having dinner, Emily. Join us." Her father, Ryan, gestured towards the empty seat. Emily stood rooted at the door, her face a picture of weary determination. "Aren't you tired of all this? Aren't you sick of getting drunk without any real reason? Are you just waiting for life to pass you by?" Emily's voice echoed around the room, her question striking a nerve. Ryan's eyes widened as he looked at his daughter. "What the hell are you talking about? You just want us to kick the bucket as soon as possible, huh? You don't like this life? Go ahead and try living your own. You think it's just us living like this? Half of the country's in the same damn mess." "But what about the other half? Why aren't we among that half?" Emily challenged, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. "Tell me, how much do you waste on alcohol? How much? They're excluding me from the graduation party because everyone thinks I'm just a bum." The last word stung the air, reflecting the harsh reality of Emily's circumstances. Overcome with frustration, Emily stormed out of the kitchen, retreating to the relative calm of her bedroom. She reached for her suitcase, intent on leaving, only to realize the bitter truth. She had very little to pack. Her possessions were as scant as her options, making the reality of her situation even more heartrending. With this stark realization, Emily collapsed onto her bed, succumbing to the waves of despair washing over her. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision as she let herself weep, mourning her circumstances and the life she was being forced to leave behind. Emily lost track of time as she lay there, engulfed by a whirlwind of emotions. She was marooned in a world where parental love seemed scarce, where dreams seemed to fade before they could take shape. The heavy weight of her reality bore down on her, shattering her heart with each thought of the life she was enduring. Her room, the only sanctuary she had, witnessed her silent cries and absorbed the echoes of her despair. Sometime later, Emily felt the bed dip as someone took a seat beside her. Lifting her tear-streaked face, she found her dad sitting there, his gaze fixated on a spot on the wall. "You're right, Emily. You're absolutely right. I'm weak," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "It just drives me to drink more, to stop thinking about it, to escape it. If you want to leave, you can. Go wherever you want if you don't like it here. I guarantee anywhere is better than this place." Through her lingering tears, Emily sat up and in shaky voice began. "Dad, don't say anything," he cut her off gently. "I know exactly what you're going to say. I can't change, not right now. Maybe later." Reaching into the back pocket of his grease-stained jeans, he produced an envelope. Tears welled up in his eyes as he regarded it, his rough hands swiping away the drops quickly. "I started setting aside money a long time ago, before all this," he said, gesturing at his worn-out clothes. "Funny thing is, even on my worst days, when I had nothing to drink, I never touched this money." Taking Emily's hand, he placed the envelope in her palm. "It's not much, but it should be enough to help you get started." With that, Ryan fell silent. Rising unsteadily, he leaned against the wall for support, walking slowly out of Emily's room, leaving her with the envelope and a glimpse into the remorse hidden behind his hardened exterior. From the kitchen, Emily heard her mother's voice grating and loud. "What are you looking at? Pour some more," she demanded, snapping Emily back to reality. Despite the moment of honesty she just shared with her father, it was painfully clear that their family's struggles were far from over. As the morning sun began to break through the horizon, Emily found herself aboard the outbound bus, leaving her town behind. Her heart felt heavy in her chest, but there was also a sense of relief and a glimmer of hope for what lay ahead. Her journey into the unknown had begun. Following the formal graduation ceremony, Josh too seemed to vanish into thin air. Nobody sought him out, their complacency fueled by his father's assurance that he would still cover the costs of the event and the gifts for the teachers. With this assurance, the students and faculty were unconcerned about Josh's whereabouts. They were content with the superficial celebration, oblivious to the deeper undercurrents that had driven two of their classmates away. A decade had rolled by. Mrs. Ann Bennett had gained a bit of weight, but her energy remained undiminished. At 55, she didn't consider herself old, especially with the flattering attention she received from the new construction teacher. Mrs. Bennett was married, but in her view, her husband was a bit of a wet blanket, constantly fretting over trivialities. He lacked the ability to set her heart aflutter, leaving her questioning her own decision to marry him. As she navigated her mid-50s, she often found herself lamenting her seemingly mundane marital life. "Is everything prepared?" her assistant inquired. "I believe so," Mrs. Bennett replied. "The decorations look beautiful. You're fortunate to have Mr. Fair's support." "You have no idea," Mrs. Bennett began, a wistful smile playing on her lips. "He even funded his son's graduation event 10 years ago. Do you remember Josh Fair?" "Indeed, he was a bright kid. Do you know where he is now?" "I'm not sure. I haven't heard from him since then. There were rumors he moved overseas, got married, but I suspect those are just idle talk." "And what about the other students? Are they all attending?" "Not everyone, of course, but those who are still in town, I did extend an invitation. Speaking of which, you won't believe who I ran into recently. Do you remember Emily Glover? I saw her mother just the other day. I barely recognized her. She was dressed like any regular person." "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb. You remember she was an alcoholic, right? I have no idea what she's done with her life, but she looked so affected. I didn't even ask about Emily. I'm quite sure she ended up just like her parents. I sincerely hope she doesn't hear about the reunion." "I see." The assistant nodded, her lips curling into a knowing smirk. The pair shared the laughter, oblivious to the irony of their conversation. A decade had slipped by since the students of New Bridge High walked its corridors. Now, Alumni were converging once again, this time for a reunion. The first cars began pulling into the school's parking lot. The occupants were primarily those who had chosen to remain in their hometown, living out their lives in the familiar confines of Newbridge. "All right, time to gather my students," Mrs. Bennet announced, stepping through the school's front doors. Blessed with the beautiful weather, they had decided to gather and greet everyone outdoors before moving to the gymnasium. The air was filled with excited chatter as former classmates reconnected. Some hadn't seen each other since their graduation day, and they eagerly shared updates and anecdotes from their lives over the past decade. "Sydney, you don't look well. Are you feeling okay?" Mrs. Bennet asked with concern. Sydney smirked. "I'm fine. A bit of food should sort me out." She let out a hollow chuckle. Mrs. Bennet was taken aback by the strong smell of alcohol on Sydney's breath and instinctively stepped back. She surveyed her former students with a careful eye. Off to one side was Tim, once an eager, helpful student who would keep her informed about class happenings. He was now a gaunt figure adorned in tattoos, his appearance carrying a certain harshness. Mrs. Bennet had heard rumors of his prison sentence for drug trafficking and robbery. Then there was Natalie, expressing her struggles as a mother of 3 with an alcoholic husband. The scene was somber and dismal. Mrs. Bennet had a sinking feeling that few of her former students had truly prospered in life. One thing was undeniable, though. They had all changed significantly. "So, shall we head in? Do you know if Josh Fair's coming? I mean, his dad sponsored all this. It would make sense for him to be here, right?" "I'm not sure, but I believe he should be." Just as Mrs. Bennet was about to lead everyone inside, a grand, sleek sedan pulled up to the school's entrance. "Ah, there he is, our very own top student, Josh." Mrs. Bennet stepped back towards the car, her eyes widening in surprise. It was indeed Josh who stepped out, dressed smartly, but he didn't head straight in. Instead, he walked towards the passenger door. He opened it and extended a hand to help a young woman step out. The woman stepped out gracefully, capturing the attention of everyone nearby. She was elegantly dressed, radiating an aura of strength and success. As she turned around, Mrs. Bennet found herself utterly stunned. Someone from the crowd suddenly cried out, "Hold on a second! Isn't that the perfume mogul? Her face is all over the billboards and shopping malls." "That's definitely her. Wow, so she's Josh's girlfriend?" The whispers rippled through the crowd as classmates gazed in amazement at the young, radiant woman who had just emerged from the car. Goodness, that face seems so familiar. As the couple drew closer, the crowd fell into a hushed silence. Mrs. Bennet wore a puzzled expression, scrutinizing the girl's features intently. Indeed, money speaks volumes. It sets people apart from the rest. "Hello, Mrs. Bennet." Mrs. Bennet froze, baffled. Why would the girlfriend or wife of a former student know her? And the voice? It sounded oddly familiar. Quickly recomposing herself, Mrs. Bennet turned her attention to Josh. "Josh Fair, look at you. You've become such a handsome man. And would you mind introducing your partner?" Josh grinned. "I didn't think I'd have to. Don't you recognize one of your old students?" The woman smiled. "Hello again, Mrs. Bennet. I can't exactly say I'm thrilled to see you, but without you, this event wouldn't be the same." "Emily Glover? Is that you?" A silence fell over the crowd. "Yes, it's me." "Wow. I can't believe it. How did you... I mean, you've changed so much. Or maybe you only noticed the clothes I wore and ignored who I was underneath them. Isn't that how you remember people?" Emily's words were sharp and direct. Mrs. Bennet recoiled slightly. "Of course not. What are you implying?" Her face took on a troubled look as she pieced together Emily's words. "Well, back then we had a sponsor for the graduation, and we didn't want to ruin things." But as she finished her sentence, she realized that she had just lied in front of the son of that sponsor, because Josh knew for sure his father didn't care about who came to the party and how they dressed. Mrs. Bennet hastily shifted the conversation and announced, "All right, everybody's here. Let's head inside. Please come in." As she held the door open for the couple, Josh stopped, turned to her, and said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennet, but I don't want my wife's presence to tarnish your reputation during today's event. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable elsewhere, so feel free to head home." The crowd fell into stunned silence as the couple gracefully proceeded into the gym. "And just for your information," Josh added with a sly grin, "I organized today's event, not my father. Don't bother trying to reach out to him about this." His voice simmered with the anger he had been suppressing for the woman who had once embarrassed his wife in front of everyone. He had initially planned a more grandiose revenge, but it was Emily who had convinced him to tone it down. Josh and Emily had been inseparable since their high school graduation, a whole decade ago. When Emily decided to embark on a new life journey and relocated to the city, Josh was not far behind. He tracked her down, his determination never wavering. However, it wasn't an easy task to convince Emily to accept him, considering their vastly different backgrounds. After all, he was the offspring of a prosperous family, while she was the child of struggling alcoholics. "Josh, I care about you. I truly love you," Emily voiced her concerns during their reunion in the urban sprawl. "But I wouldn't want you to disappoint your parents on account of me. Do you genuinely desire to be with someone like me? Someone who doesn't align with your societal standing? All I yearn for is an escape from the harsh judgment." To this, Josh responded, "Emily, my family is my family. But if I were so hung up on our differences, would I have rejected the privileged life of a private school? My father's wealth holds no sway over me. I'm here to carve out my own destiny, and I want to build that future alongside you." Upon hearing his earnest declaration, a profound realization dawned upon Emily. Perhaps all the trials and tribulations she had experienced were meant to lead her to someone as understanding and accepting as Josh. During the initial months of their shared journey, the young couple poured their heart and soul into whatever job opportunities came their way. The notion of pursuing a higher education didn't even cross their minds. Their focus was solely on making ends meet, an objective they managed to achieve in the first few years of their shared life. Emily didn't fret over their financial limitations, as she had become accustomed to a life with limited resources. She had, metaphorically speaking, seen the bottom and learned to navigate it. On the other hand, Josh brought a different perspective to their struggles. His childhood, spent observing his father making astute business decisions, equipped him with a pragmatic mindset and a strong drive to learn and grow. Soon, their unique backgrounds and experiences converged, creating a powerful synergy that would lead to something extraordinary. As their earnings started to increase, Emily developed a keen interest in luxuries she had never been able to afford in her youth. Particularly, her newfound fascination with perfumes triggered a series of revelations. She started noticing ways in which perfume packaging and marketing could be significantly improved. The combination of her lived experiences, her eye for details that others might overlook, and her newfound interest in a product that symbolized a life she'd never had, all started to come together in a most unexpected way. Their humble one-bedroom apartment swiftly transformed into a dual-purpose space, serving as both an office and a modest warehouse for their emerging startup. Orders began pouring in at an astonishing rate, soon outpacing their capacity to keep up. They found themselves in a whirlwind of success they could hardly have imagined. A year down the line, the young couple's relentless efforts had borne fruit beyond their wildest dreams. They now owned a chain of 12 stores scattered across the city, a testament to their diligence, perseverance, and the power of their synergistic partnership. "Josh, out of all the beautiful girls out there, why did you choose me?" Emily inquired one day, a vulnerable note resonating in her voice. "First things first, let's clear this up. To me, you are the most beautiful among all," Josh began, his eyes softening. "But your beauty isn't merely physical. Your humility truly sets you apart. I've never once heard you gripe or stress about the things you lacked. You've always been appreciative of what you have, and just look at what you've managed to accomplish with that spirit." Josh voiced his thoughts, gazing at Emily, whose eyes were now shimmering with unshed tears. Mrs. Bennet stood solitary outside the school, her gaze fixed on the ground. Not far from her, the construction teacher leaned casually against the wall. "I'm not sure what you did to upset them, but honestly, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes right now," he chuckled. "It's a long story," she muttered. "Well, I've got all the time in the world. Fancy a chat in my shop? I've got a decent bottle of wine. We could discuss your predicament." Mrs. Bennet glanced one last time at the school's entrance before tossing her hands up in defeat. "Yeah, screw it. Let's go." Emily had finally exacted her revenge, yet she found herself with an unsettling feeling. She had anticipated this day for so long, the day she would triumph over the person who had inflicted pain upon her, yet she found no satisfaction in it. The anticipated rush of victory eluded her, replaced instead with a strange emptiness. "Josh, I feel awful. I can't bear this anymore. Can we go get her?" "I mean, you can try. I don't think she'll come now." "Alright, let me try. Are you okay with that?" "Honey, you know that you can do whatever you feel is right." "Okay, I'll be right back." Meanwhile, Mrs. Bennet sat blankly in the construction shop. The construction teacher was clumsily attempting to open the wine bottle. "Quite a spectacle you had there. So what's the deal with those former students of yours?" However, Mrs. Bennet remained silent, struggling to find words. As Emily ventured outside in search of Mrs. Bennet, she found no trace of the woman anywhere nearby. Retracing her steps, she strolled past the construction shop. Through the sliver of space between the door and its frame, she spotted Mrs. Bennet engaged in conversation with another teacher. Drawing closer, Emily heard the murmur of her own name being discussed. As Emily stood there taking in the scene, Mrs. Bennet continued, "I had preconceived notions about Emily. She seemed so vulnerable, without anyone strong enough to stand up for her, and instead of lending a helping hand, I took advantage of her weakness. I tormented her. I suppose I have my own demons to grapple with." She paused, lost in thought, before speaking up again. "I wish I had the courage to apologize to her. It's just that the embarrassment is too overwhelming right now." The construction teacher responded gently. "Accepting your mistake and apologizing is indeed a sign of strength. Don't you agree? Do you really think I should seek her forgiveness?" "I do. Absolutely," he assured. Unbeknownst to them, Emily stood by the door, listening to the conversation. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took a deep breath, preparing to confront Mrs. Bennet. Surprise flashed across both Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Black's faces as Emily rapped lightly on the door before stepping into the room. Her composed demeanor was a stark contrast to the shocked expressions she was met with. "Hello, Mr. Black." Emily greeted the construction teacher first, nodding respectfully to him. He flashed a surprised, yet pleased smile at her acknowledgement. Turning towards Mrs. Bennet, Emily's countenance softened. "Mrs. Bennet, about what happened earlier," she started, carefully choosing her words. "I just want to say that Josh didn't mean to cause you any hurt. He was just trying to support me, make me feel better. But to be honest, it didn't actually make me feel better. In fact, it made me feel worse." Her voice carried a sincerity that filled the room, echoing off the walls of the quiet shop. As the words left Emily's mouth, a sudden self-realization dawned on her. She was dangerously close to becoming a mirror image of the person who had once bullied her. It was a sobering thought, one that made her shudder. After she extended an invitation for Mrs. Bennet to return to the gym, the older woman's eyes welled up with tears. Unable to hold back any longer, Mrs. Bennet broke down and began to cry, her apologies tumbling out in a rush. She expressed remorse for her past actions and apologized sincerely to Emily, an unexpected display of vulnerability that touched everyone present. The reunion turned out to be an incredibly fun event. Josh, once a silent and distant student, was now the center of the celebration, swaying gracefully on the dance floor with his wife Emily. The gym, a space that held countless memories for both of them, became their dance floor, echoing with their laughter and the melody of a decade-old song.